Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Herp Monday number 15 and we have a good one, and this one was actually requested by Mrs. Ping herself. She's really taken a liking to this animal. She's looked at videos of it. She has a blast learning about this animal. Today we are going to be talking about the marine iguana. Marine iguana, or scientific name Amblyrhynchus cristatus. Again, Amblyrhynchus cristatus. Another common name for this is the sea iguana. It is part of the family Iguanidae. So, Iguanidae, it's pretty easy to figure out that Iguanidae is the family of iguanas. It's not too much of a leap. These are only found on the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands are part of the Ecuador. So, as many people have heard, Galapagos has a lot of endemic animals that are found only on those islands and nowhere else. And this is one of them. This is the only species in its genus, so this is very unique lizard. No other lizards in its genus. And something that kind of lends to that is this is the only marine lizard species in the world. This is the only lizard that will dive down into marine environments. So how did it evolve? How did it come to the Galapagos and evolve and become the only marine lizard species in the world? Well, there are actually other iguanas on the Galapagos Islands. There are the land iguanas, and there are 3 species of land iguanas, and the marine iguanas. So there are 4 species of iguanas, and they all evolved from a common ancestor. And it's presumed that the ancestor got there from rafting. So rafting is basically a big storm comes through, and a bunch of iguanas they're on a tree, the tree blows over, it gets washed out to sea, and it makes it to the islands, and then they populate those islands. And so basically then they split and new species develop, they evolve. So then the 3 land iguanas happened, and then you have the marine iguanas. Now the land iguanas and the marine iguanas can hybridize when their ranges overlap. The offspring are infertile, but there is enough genetic similarities that these can hybridize with each other. It's not very common, I don't think. As you can see in this picture, they have extremely thick bodies with very short limbs. This helps them when they swim. And also in this picture, you can see they have a very short, blunt nose. And as with basically all iguanas, they have this row of spine right down their backbone. However, depending on the island and the time of year, you actually get different colors and differences in the spines. So you can have this really colorful short spines. You get something like that. You got this one, which is super colorful. Don't ask me which islands they are from, but apparently you can tell, certain islands have the most colorful ones, and some don't even get away from this very dark, kind of bland color. And usually these are going to have dark colors outside of breeding season. So this is a breeding male. They do have a flattened tail. You can see in this wonderful picture here, that flattened tail is to help with swimming. You can think of some of the nutria, the water rats, muskrat. They have a flattened tail as well. That helps them swimming. They undulate kind of like a snake. So think how a snake would swim through the water. That's how these are swimming through the water. And those short limbs are, they don't provide a lot of water resistance, but they help them hold on to the bottom whenever they dive down to the bottom, because that's where they're going. These can get marine iguanas can dive. They have been found as deep as 30 meters, which is right at about 100 feet deep. And they can spend up to an hour underwater. Now, that's not to mean that they do that all the time. Usually their dives are about 5 to 10 minutes. Very, much shorter dives than 1 hour. Now, because of the different islands, they have different sizes. So all of the iguanas, the adult iguanas, they can range anywhere from 12 centimeters to 56 centimeters. So 4.5 inches to 22 inches in their body. So from their snout to the base of the tail. So they can go anywhere from 12 centimeters to 56 meters. Like they can get really big. It all depends on which island they are at. And then the tail length can go anywhere from 17 centimeters to 84 centimeters. So you're talking about 6.5 inches to 33 inches in length. So some of them have an extremely long tail. And the larger islands of the Galapagos chain are the ones that have the larger iguanas. The smaller islands have smaller iguanas. It's, think about it, that kind of makes sense. With the larger islands, they're going to have much more resources for these to pick and choose from, things like that. Now, as far as their max weight goes, these will range anywhere from 1 kilogram, which is about 2 pounds, to 12 kilograms, and that's about 26 pounds. So as I said, short and stocky, but these are really thick, heavy lizards. Most iguanas are not anywhere close to that heavy. A really thick, stout lizard. Males on average are significantly longer and weigh about twice as much as the adult females. That's very uncommon actually in the lizard world. Most of the time, the females are actually going to be bigger than males, because the bigger you are as a female, the more eggs you can produce. So this is almost a little flip-flop, and that probably has to do with the fact that these males are very territorial during breeding season. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Now, these have been documented to getting as old as 60 years, so 60 years old, but they average about 12 years or less, so they don't really live that long in the wild. 12 years is still a decent amount of time, but they have been known to get up to 60 years old. Now, going into the reproduction, when these males are aggressive, the males will actually, during the breeding season, they will congregate in a area to form what is called a lek. A lek is pretty common in some birds and other animals as well. And the males will just gather in an area, and then they have a very small spot that they are putting on their mating displays. For these, this is a lot of head bobbing and other things like that. So, they're sitting there bobbing their heads. The females will walk throughout the lek and find what they believe is the best male for them. Now, males will fight each other during this time, especially if they like the locations that the males are in. So what they'll do is they'll actually headbutt each other, and on their head they have almost small horns. They have scales that create little bumps, almost cone scales, and they'll just sit there in the lock, and they'll just do basically, think of bullfighting. They'll just headbutt each other and try and push each other. And this fight can actually last up to an hour. Normally it doesn't, and they'll take breaks in there, but eventually one will succeed and the other male will go off to find his own little spot. Now, what do these things eat? Why are they going into the bottom? Well, these are actually algae eaters. These are almost entirely herbivorous. And by the way, you can see in this picture how they have some of these scales that are coming up with little horns, making these little nodules. That's what they're using to fight. But these feed almost exclusively on red and green algae in the tidal zones. Most of the time, especially the females and the juveniles, they're gonna do right at the tidal zone, so right where the tide comes in and out. And the males will actually go out a little farther and actually dive down. And you can see these claws and these limbs are really good at hooking into the rock crevices. and then they sit there, and that short snout, that short, very blunt nose allows them to scrape that algae off. And so that's why these are marine iguanas, why they're the only ones in the world. So basically how this happened is there was a resource that was not being used by the other iguanas, and some iguanas evolved to utilize that resource. They developed their own niche. Now, they digest this by doing what is called hindgut fermenting. And hindgut fermenting is actually how horses will digest their food as well. So everyone can kind of think of a cow. You know, everyone has heard of the cow having 4 stomachs. You know, that's called a foregut fermenting. They are fermenting all of their food before it actually enters into their main digestive tract, their stomach, things like that. Well, the algae will pass through their entire digestive system, and then right at the end there's usually what's called a ceca. I don't know if this is how it is. I'm just talking about how most of hindgut fermenting does, but then that food will get stored in that sac and it'll get digested a little further, and it'll get absorbed in there. It's not near as efficient as foregut fermenting, but that's how these particularly digest their food. Now, they do this by using symbiotic bacteria. So there's bacteria in their system that helps them digest this algae. And fun fact, for the first few months after hatching, the juveniles will actually feed on the feces of the adult iguanas. So they eat the poop of the adult iguanas. And they do that to actually get the bacteria that is in the adult iguanas into their own digestive system, to allow them to build up that bacteria load to help them digest when they start eating algae. So just a little evolutionary trick, instead of, you know, just a way for them to get that beneficial bacteria into their system quickly. Now, something about these is as you can imagine, these inhale a lot of seawater. This is a salt. They are in the salt water. So they are ingesting a lot of salt water while they're eating this algae. Well, as many people know, you can't just drink salt water. You get dehydrated and you die. So how do these things live in the salt? How do they eat this much salt water and survive? Especially in an area that doesn't have that much actual fresh water. Well, what they do is these actually have a very, very efficient salt gland. And this salt gland is evolved to actually remove the salt from the blood without removing the water. It's super efficient. It's very, very critical to their survival, because otherwise they would actually dehydrate and die. So that's what that salt gland is for. It's just for removing salt. But there's been a lot of videos, and we have a picture here. They sneeze out the salt. So all of this is basically super concentrated salt. Right there, that's being sneezed out. That is removing that toxic salt from the bloodstream and leaving that water in, so that they're still getting their hydration, but they're keeping their bodily functions in a equilibrium. Sounds painful. I wouldn't say that it's painful. I mean, their probably noses are pretty dead from this. So you wouldn't do this if it just completely hurt. Like animals, they would have evolved some way to either deal with that pain. Either they're just flat out ignoring it, or the sneezing process happens in a way that doesn't inflame their tissues or things like that. These are very lethargic, though. These are extremely lethargic. As anyone who has been in the ocean knows, ocean water is cold. Well, these are ectothermic, meaning that they get their body heat from outside resources. So what happens is they spend most of their time actually sunning on the rocks, as everyone knows lizards do. And then they dive down in the water real quick, eat their food, and then they come back out and they basically immediately go back to sunning because they've lost a lot of body heat to the water. Now, the most kind of an interesting fact on these, I mean, these are a very interesting animal, but one of the most interesting things that I found the most interesting when I was doing my research on these is how awful people thought of these when these were first discovered. Early visitors to the Galapagos Islands thought these were very ugly and completely disgusting, and I got 2 quotes from that. In 1798, a captain of the British Royal Navy wrote this: "The iguanas are small and of a sooty black, which, if possible, heightens their native ugliness. Indeed, so disgusting is their appearance that no one on board could be prevailed on to take them as food." Basically, back then in the late 1700s, early 1800s, people going around the islands, they didn't know if they were going to find any more food. They didn't know if they were going to find anything to eat or drink. So most of the time that they went to an island, they pretty much killed and ate everything. That's why we had the dodo bird, and among other things, dodo bird go extinct is thing. So basically, the sailors were like, this thing is so ugly, we don't want to eat it. But then in 1835, Charles Darwin, who everyone has heard, an evolutionary scientist, really important, but he had this to say about it: "The black lava rocks on the beach are frequented by large, most disgusting, clumsy lizards. They are as black as the porous rocks over which they crawl and seek their prey from the sea. Somebody calls them the imps of darkness. They assuredly will become the land they inhabit." Basically, Charles Darwin was like, look, these are ugly, clumsy, they have no color. Someone called them this, and I think they belong in this little hellish landscape that they've evolved in. So, yeah, that was pretty rude. But now, to be fair, these things are definitely clumsy on land. These things cannot move on land in any way. Very smooth in the water. These things can barely walk, it seems. So I'll give them at least the clumsy part. But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you do, I'd really appreciate it. Please leave me a comment, something you'd like to see on this video. Just asking for one comment on someone new. But thank you guys so much again. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones.